as the first
Yes,
question?
correct, Dr.
Okay.
Lambert. We're going to
All
kick
right.
off and do an intro
Okay.
and then
The first question I posed to the panelists is you.
Okay. Perfect. I have the agenda now up
Yeah.
on.
And Nick, you haven't evicted the Firefly because the whole session is recorded.
yeah, I don't have the power to evict.
Oh, okay. Is that something Rachel could do?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, Rachel, you need to kick Fireflies out.
I just did so, I believe.
Okay, we have people joining us. Welcome. Okay, I wait for your cues, Rachel.
Okay, let me confirm. Okay. Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is our CEO Think Tank webinar. Oh, I'm sorry to jump ahead. Uh, Reimagining Pathways to Community College Success. We have a number of panelists joining us today. We are recording the webinar and we will make it available to you after we are finished today. If you have any questions, we'll try to get to them at the end of the session. Please place them in the Q&A. If you're not seeing that, you're welcome to do the chat as well. But again, we may not get to them. And if so, we'll provide contact information at the end. And I think we are ready to get started. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel, and I want to thank AACC for hosting this webinar. And before we start our conversation today, I'm Dingjo Curry at the CC Think Tank, that's Community College Think Tank and Strategic Solutions. I also host a Leadership Institute for Community College Emerging Leaders. Before we start our conversation, I want to just take a minute to provide some background to the context of today's webinar. Last April, it seems like yesterday actually, at the AACC annual conference, we convened a CEO think tank. That's a small invitation-based gathering of community college presidents and chancellors from across the country in a design lab style working session to give the CEOs that rare but protected space to think freely together with very bold, very honest, very creative, and very strategic data-driven ideas. And the theme that we really thought about is around this data-driven breakthroughs in reimagining, really asking them to reimagine without guardrails, without constraints, the different ways, different pathways to community college success in this new era. What emerged were quite powerful ideas and some very provocative questions for CEOs to explore. Hopefully that they have taken notes and have asked some of those questions, explore with their own home campus or systems. And some of them I think is worthy to explore with legislatures. And I also believe that part of the think tank ideas is for ed tech companies to ponder on the future developments. Those ideas were captured in our CEO think tank brief. And today's webinar is the continuation of that work. This webinar is an opportunity for some of the CEOs attended to share what was generated with a broader community out there like yourself who are here in presence. And thank you for joining us. And we will also share the CEO Think Tank Brief white paper with you at the end of today's webinar. This is an amazing partnership between community college, think tank, AACC, and Zogotech. Without Zogotech, I think it would have been challenging for us to hold that space. So I am going to turn to my good partner from Zogotech, Nick Barrel, to share why Zogotech wanted to sponsor this creative space for our community college CEOs. Nick?
Thank you, Ding Joe, and happy Friday to everybody, and thank you all for joining us today. Um, I'm Nick Burrell, as Ding Joe said. I am our VP of Strategic Partnerships here at Zogo Tech, and have been working closely with Think Tank and many of our college presidents. And where we saw the value here was an opportunity to do two things: learn a tremendous amount from a wide variety and different types of community college CEOs around the challenges that they experience around data, being able to support the students and get everybody across the finish line to earning degrees and family sustaining wages in the most efficient way possible, and then also brainstorm big ideas that would allow us to think about how we're supporting our clients, what offerings we provide, how we might be able to change our product or offer enhancements so that we can then, help facilitate some of the big ideas that came out of this and help navigate some of those challenges that came out of our conversation.
Thank you again, Zogtech, for being our good partner. Okay, so let me introduce to you, and Rachel, if you can advance the slide, we have a panel. That's just myself and Nick. Then there's the next slide is for the panelists. We chose four presidents and chancellors who participated in the think tank with us last year, and we asked them to reflect on some of the ideas surfaced in the think tank. So by alpha order, Dr. Rebecca Ashford, president of Chattanooga State Community College, Dr. Rachel Karts, the chancellor of Ivy Tech Community College, Hamilton County campus, and Dr. Lee Lambert, chancellor of Foothill De Anza Community College District. And last but in no way he's least, I can tell you that, and that's Dr. John Ski, president of HEC, Central Pennsylvania's Community College. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. So to start, I'm going to ask Nick to quickly review a partial list of the bold ideas that generated from our CEO think tank. Kind of just help the panelists refresh. Nick, do you mind run them through?
Not at all. And yes, Rachel, this is the last slide, so no more slide advancing. We're gonna stay here and just have a conversation. But we broke this into kind of three different areas, right? Student success and support, pathways and careers, and institutional strategy. And we looked at these very specific topics and we broke up into like small focus groups to talk about how we're going to tackle each one of these and big ideas that could come out of that, whether that is reimagining student support with AI and predictive analytics, using data to power personalized student success, and closing gaps and breaking systemic barriers. And I think all of those go together. And we're going to hear some interesting ideas. One of my favorites from this particular topic is around wearable technology and some really interesting ideas around nudging that I'm sure we'll get into today. In pathways and careers, really being able to create a flexible and mastery-based pathway for every learner, adopting lifelong learning portfolios so that they grow with you, because not all of our learners just go once at the very beginning of leaving high school, but they're lifelong learners and they're continuing to grow that portfolio. And how do we allow that portfolio to grow and live with those students throughout time, and aligning those programs with workforce needs and opportunities? And then finally, in the institutional strategy section, we want to find ways to challenge legacy models to unlock institutional innovation. One of the things that Ding Joe said at the beginning of the think tank when we were there in person that I really loved was, this is about coming up with there are no barriers. This is all thinking big, right? What are the ideas that we can come up with? And there are no limitations to that. If you could do what you wanted to do without having to think about the different, hurdles or roadblocks or guardrails that you might need to navigate, what ideas can we come up with? And so that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today, and that's why we call them bold ideas, because we did not use those as a filter in how we were doing our thinking. Um, Driving financial sustainability with data informed strategy, building trust and accountability through data transparency, and centering students' stories in data and decision making. And I will pass it back over to you, Ding Joe.
Okay, great. Now I just have a quick reflection for just kind of get the feel for those who weren't there. And so to my panelists, in this think tank space, and I wanted to ask you what felt substantively different intellectually and strategically as a CEO level from a typical session that you might attend to listen to someone. But this is, I put you to work and to think really way, way outside the box. If you remember, I said, go to the universe, then I'll bring you back down to earth. Can you share a little bit just reflecting on what that space meant to you?
As I reflect back on that day, what what this think tank really meant was we were operating at the first principles level. And when I say first principles, I'm talking about those fundamental assumptions that shape how our system is designed, rather than just talking about best practices. Because most national convenience, as you know, kind of optimize around our existing constraints with best practices. And this really asked us to suspend that and really look to address the things that are really impacting our system, like time and credit and scale and governance, and really think about what's the role of intelligence as an infrastructure. So why did that resonate for me? Because early in my career, I was in the United States Army, and I had the opportunity. I trained in one area. I get to my duty station, and they OJT'd me on the job training for an entirely different area. And so I learned on the job from a mastery-based learning perspective. I progressed at my own pace. I applied learning in real time, and I completed the pathway based on demonstrated capability, not a calendar, not seat time. So this think tank really is about taking ideas like that and how do we amplify it? And now we have a new valuable partner called artificial intelligence.
Okay, I don't want to call on you, Rebecca or Skeeter.
Yeah, I would like to add, what Lee said was just spot on. And suspending constraints, that's what I kept thinking about it. And honestly, it was a little bit challenging to do. We're so accustomed to thinking about the rules that we have, whether they're related to accreditation or the way we're structured traditionally, or the number of clock hours or credit hours that we have to adhere to. And in this case, we were all challenged, and I'm going to use that word challenge because it was challenging to say, what if there were no rules at all and you were building from the beginning? I found it to be very challenging, and a few times had to really do some out of the box thinking and remind myself, remember, don't bring in the constraints. So it was really very refreshing to be able to think about what would we do if we could do anything.
Great to dream, right?
And for me to follow up on that, Lee made mention of it briefly, is this idea of national convening and how they sometimes can be scripted. This was truly unscripted dialogue. But the way I summarized it when I was talking to others after that meeting was, is it wasn't being in the room just for visibility. It was being at the table for impact. And that's what I was able to bring back to our institution, is many of the conversations that occurred around that table for impact.
And I'll just add on quickly and agree with everything that the other panelists said. But for me, it felt like coming home. One of my earlier degrees I have a master's of fine arts and creative writing. And so it really emulated that experience, the workshop model of the creative writing degree, where everybody gets around the table and they are, you're suspending reality. And there is not there are no boundaries whatsoever, as have been said, which is always a really magical space for me to participate in. And so it was very exciting.
Great. And Nick, how is that for you from the Zogotech, from the industry perspective, being there? You were with us as a partner all the way from planning to the execution. I just wondering from a ed tech company, Zogotech, what was it like learning from the CEOs there, listening to some of their out-of-box thinking as they were developing?
You know, I found it to be very interesting from a few different perspectives. So, I worked in at colleges for over 12 years before I came over to the vendor side. Um, us too, we work within constraints, whether it's constraints of technology that we're building, resources, other pieces, and so I also had to continually do some mental gymnastics to remind myself that we were no constraints, through this conversation. And what it really, I think, like brought to light for me was a lot of people are dealing with a lot of the same high level issues. We see that from the different, presidents, regardless if you have a big school or a small school. But how we tackle those are very different depending on where our background or our expertise comes from. And so, where I found a tremendous amount of value was the numerous amount of ideas coming out of this so fast and furious in the 2 hours that we were together. And, we had note recorders and different things taking notes. But in my brain, I was trying to jot down everything I'm hearing, right? Because this is so invaluable. And I really think it challenged us when we came out of it to say, well, where can we make a deeper impact, right? From what we're hearing here, where are we able to move the needle at our company? Because Ding Joe, you've said this so many times, but we're partners. We're not just the vendor supplying a tool. We need to hear from you all so that we can make adjustments and provide tools that are going to be the most effective.
Great. Now I'm turning to my panelists again. So there were many ideas. I think one of my favorite is getting rid of the Carnegie unit. I think you knew that. We were plotting the murder of Carnegie unit. But I want to ask you, which idea most challenged you, your existing assumptions about how community college operate today, and what did idea, the ideas that really just sparked for you?
Do you mind if I start off?
No, whoever, jump in. Yeah.
Okay. So, probably in the session, I wouldn't have answered it this way, but in reflecting back, I believe if we went to a competency-based education system, which, there are some strides being taken in various levels and in certain states. I know in Tennessee, there's starting to be some work about what would competency-based education look like. But if we truly went to a completely competency-based system of education, it would blow up everything that we do if that was the only way we did it. There wouldn't be credit hours. There wouldn't be an amount of time you have to figure out. But that would also affect employment contracts for faculty. What would that look like? Time to degree. Well, whatever time you need. So it would all, the entire system, federal financial aid, that would be completely different. It wouldn't necessarily be, are you enrolled full-time or part-time? Well, maybe financial aid would be, well, what did you accomplish? Maybe it would be backwards. So the more I think about that one, that's the one that I think if we went to a completely competency-based education system, I believe that one would just blow up everything we do currently.
Rebecca, I support that wholeheartedly, and that was a major conversation of what we had during the session. But what I'd like to say is, I'm not sure if it was transformational, Ding Joe, but it really made me rethink. Community colleges, we're known for our flexibility, right? But we're still anchored in semesters and credit hours and all that Rebecca was referencing. I think the way that I looked at this is, instead of how do we help students fit into our structure, and that is everything that Rebecca mentioned and others may, to what structures would we design if we truly started with the student? And again, that isn't new thinking, but by spending those 2 hours, that was one of the themes that came across to me. And when I came back, we did take a look at that because so many of our policies, so much of what we are doing is really this is how we as an institution do it. And if we truly are going to be student focused, it really is what works best for the student. And I also want to say, and I know Lee will probably mention this consistently, the employer. Most of the students who are with us are here to gain a skill, to gain a program, a degree, so they can get a very good job. And I think we have to stay very close to what employers want, and we need to take a look at our structures, our systems, so that our students, we are focusing on our students and what it is that employers need. That's what came back to me. Again, not revolutionary, but a reminder, a very, very, very intense reminder that we have to think about how do we build ourselves around the student.
I'll just plus one that they both said everything that I was going to say. And I think it's I was definitely in the group that brought up the Carnegie unit, and I think this is going to come up a little bit later, but Rebecca's right. Like everything is tied to that 120-year-old tradition. And ski is right as well, should it be? And so I think it will disrupt how we do everything, but it will also be student it's really how we become truly student and employer focused.
And Rachel, if I could jump in on that. So what we talked about was so encouraging and inspiring. But now the issue is if we start breaking it down, looking at our accrediting bodies, looking at our policies institutionally, that's where the real work has to happen. So we had a great 2 hour session. We took some of this back to our institutions, but we know we're still confined and constrained by the systems that have, I think, as Rachel said, 120 years or more. And so what is it that we're going to do now to be action oriented? What are some of the things we can do now to continue the conversation? It's great, but what's the action? And that's the thing that I'm struggling with.
And I'll just add to that because, our current model is an industrial age model that really is rooted in the late 19th and going into the 20th century, right? And so we've got to blow that up because in the digital era, that changes this notion of time, changes this notion of the Carnegie unit. And so I really think if we follow what's happening here in the Silicon Valley where my district is located, you have NVIDIA and these other companies really blowing up this notion of what is intelligence and how does that really integrate into your infrastructures, into your embedded systems, just like electricity was at one time, and we just take electricity for granted now. But that was not the case many, many decades ago. And so I think we're at an opportune time now to really reimagine what's happening, but in a digital era mindset, not in an industrial era mindset.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I think, Ski, you talked about what are we going to do? I think these ideas, if we don't stop talking about it, then they may die. But if we start, initiating these conversations in our own system, our own campus, to legislatures, to accreditation commissions, right? To how might we do this a little bit different now? We're in a different day. So I love that there are some seeds, but we need to fertilize some of those ideas to come to fruition and bear fruit. Now, one of the most provocative concept was assigning every student with an AI partner or an assistant, like lifelong companion in learning, available 24/7. I'm just wondering, as a CEO, when you saw that, what excited you or what scared you most about that kind of idea, having an AI partner for your student at all times? And what responsibilities does it place on the leadership with something like that?
And before we jump in there, can I jump in on the last question really quick? I wanted to kind of share one thought from my side. Here at Zogotech, we provide community colleges with data analytics solutions, and we surface insights. And as I'm listening to everybody talk about, you know, dismantling something like the Carnegie unit, my question as a vendor then becomes, if they did that, how are we built to be flexible to change and pivot with a change like that, right? Because that to everybody's point, we would be blowing up the system in a lot of ways, right? And our products are built around that same system that everybody, all the colleges
Mhm.
are ingrained in. And so it really started to push us of, if major changes were made, how are our products built and flexible to pivot with these types of changes to support more flexible reporting that isn't just unit based or credit based? That was something that really came to light for me in listening to all of you talk, at the think tank and again today.
Mhm. Thanks, Nick. So back to my question is that what do you think that when upon admission you assign an AI partner to your student, make sure that they're partners and they're successful? Is that exciting or is that scary to you?
I think it's both. And I'll say I'm on our campuses, and I'm sure this is true at community colleges across the country, is like we are constantly challenging our teams to how do you maximize resources so that you can maximize the meaningful time spent with students of your humans. And so an AI assistant, I mean, it allows you to do just that. The scary thing is what scares me about any change, which is how is it going to making sure that we do not harm the student, the campus, the communities that we serve. I'm not going to say anything that anybody doesn't know. AI is scary when it's learning AI, when it starts to take on personalities or try to be exactly what the user wants it to be. So as leaders, we have to think about like how are we putting up those barriers around the AI? Are we building the knowledge base? Are we only letting the AI use the knowledge base that we feed it? Are we allowing it to become its own person so that it is truly supporting the student and the way that we endorse that support for the student so that the unimaginable doesn't happen.
And I think
Abs-
to add to Rachel's point, it's the exciting part is easy to focus on, right? But it's really on this other side that we need to be very mindful about. And I think that's why liberal arts, among many pieces, are so critical because it starts to put us in a place where we ask those critical questions to ensure that that AI assistant is going to be guided by us humans in a responsible way with the appropriate guardrails, et cetera. But I want to also come back to the other side. I went to the Evergreen State College. I had a very personalized learning experience. This was in the industrial era model. And I wish that every student could have what I had. I had my own Rudy Martin, who was honest with me. He helped guide me and coach me, and was able to grow because of that. Every student deserves that level, and I think today we can provide that if we can leverage these AI pieces responsibly.
I just would like to jump in here. I remember at the think tank, I was really excited about this one. My background is student affairs, student services, and so imagining a way of ensuring that a student doesn't fall through the cracks, or imagining a way where that shy student or a student who is going to be hesitant to reach out for help, or when you make the referral, um, is going to be less likely to take the next step, even if you walk them over to the next step. So that was very exciting to me. But then you start thinking about, boy, our inputs better be right. The predictions that the AI model would be making, they better be accurate. And as has been alluded to, by Rachel, AI better be it better be accurate. And how do we know if it's not accurate and if it's leading students the wrong way, giving them the wrong fit for them? But then, and then I guess thinking more on a on a um, on a level beyond higher ed, losing that human touch is very scary to me. And I know this is the way the world is going, and this is what many of our students, particularly our traditional age students, this is what they're accustomed to. We all have experienced students who are very hesitant to talk to someone in person or make a phone call. But this would be another loss of an interpersonal communication, which is so critical to our humanity.
Rebecca, I heard something that follows up on that very closely. I was at an event the other day, and someone said that AI is to expand human capacity, not replace human care. And I found that to be very meaningful and maybe kind of supports your idea as well. Supporting everything that my colleagues have said, the thing that I want to say is that I really do think this AI assistant, the exciting part is it has the potential to radically level the playing field for all students. And we can go into greater depth about competency based, as we talked about in the last question and all. But a couple of the things that I thought about is the risk of unintentional harm that can happen. Something that hasn't been mentioned yet is this whole idea that if we don't have guardrails put in place, we already know that data privacy is an issue, bias is an issue, equity issues all surround this. And we need to be very concerned about all of that. So what we need to do is, as leaders, I think, we need to look at, as we invest time and money and effort with our colleagues in our colleges, we need to look at strong governance and accountability. I think that's important for us as leaders. We need to prepare or allow professional development or so to prepare our people as they shape AI to complement pedagogy and even advising. We are finding great success in tutor.com in our tutoring. I was at Hershey Medical Center recently, and a nurse said to me, I need to tell you, a graduate who said, I wouldn't have finished if I didn't have tutor.com. It allowed me to ask questions. It allowed me to prepare myself for the class the next day. And so I think it's really important. So the last thing I really wanted to say is that we need to look at AI in some ways to look at gaining more of the humanness, if you will, and helping our students not lose that touch in an educational institution. I think it's very, very important for us to ensure that the AI partner, that they gain more humanity is really what I'm saying, not less in their educational experience. And I think we as leaders need to put those guardrails into place and influence that as best we can.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing I'd like to say, Lee put out a great article, Ding Joe, that you had made mention of earlier. I think it's an article that people should really take a look at. Lee, if you maybe want to put that in the chat, people could maybe get out there and take a look at your article.
It was a very article. Rachel, actually, can you take down that slide so we can see the panelists much better? Because we're just going to have conversation. And from what you just said, some of the fears, right? I think is really important. I'm going to turn to our tech guys. Like everybody I know at Zogotechnic, you're a data wizard and you're also a tech wizard. So from a data and a tech perspective, what does really AI ready means? Because we just talked about being very human-centered, very accurate, non-biased, which by the way, all those errors that you mentioned, Steve, are being made by human beings right now. So if we have the opportunity to perfect that, right, to eliminate those layers, so what is foundational? What's AI ready means for you from a tech company? And how do you make that personalized support that we're dreaming about don't have those kind of errors to support for our students?
Yeah, great question, Ding Joe. So a couple things. Last year, Gartner did a study where they said that through this year, through 2026, roughly 60% of all AI projects across multiple industries will fail, stall, or be abandoned due to the lack of AI ready data. And really, what they mean by this is incorrect data that is being fed to the AI to then produce insights, results, guidance, whatever that would be. And so, not having accurate data to start results in almost a technology version of telephone in some ways that gets distorted by the end of the time the data is being, reviewed, manipulated, adjusted to then produce results. And so, how do we get the data as accurate as possible from the beginning, right? And so, one example I can share, and one way that we currently work with our schools is around program maps and pathways. And 80% of students change their major at least once at a community college. I mean, I might even go higher. And but the students aren't telling you that they are changing their majors, right? They're not giving you always that information. And so you're looking at what the student's enrolled program is in your student information system or your system of record, and you're basing scheduling off of this. But we might be scheduling based off of students in programs that aren't actually being as heavily taken as it seems by the data that we have. So one of the ways we utilize AI is to compare every student against every single program. And we do a massive degree audit every single night on the students. And then we punch out a few different things utilizing, advanced technology to say, this is the program we actually think the student is in. Here are programs that we think students have actually already completed on campus. And we give you all of this data and lists of students, but then to what everybody else is saying, we are not automating the process of then telling the students you're eligible for this award. We are then giving you the tools to then have your staff do the care and the outreach to guide the students once we've identified them for you. So the time consuming piece of identifying the students is taken off of your plate so that you have more time to have those conversations so that we can get students completed with degrees. I know that we were recently on campus at a college during their fall graduation. And we had some students say, I had no idea I had completed this degree. And the college reached out and now my life has changed, right? And we saw tears and from students, tears of joy of being able to accomplish these items. This is what we're here for. This is what we think tools will help with. And that this is one way, for example, to get the data right before you do more advanced things like AI course scheduling or some of these other things. We got to get the programs right first.
Yeah. Well, what do we have to get right? My next question to the presidents and chancellor is that, well, we dreamed a lot. We had a dream list, and there are many structural barriers for these ideas, right? You talked about that system, the entire system has to change. So, from your perspective, what would you say that will have to change? Just start from your local, your college, or your system what will have to change institutionally, policy or leadership courage? I think a lot of times is the leader's courage to really boldly say, let's try this, right? For a pathway that can move from just pilots to a system-wide reality. Because I love some of those ideas and I want to see what would it take to start something.
Yeah, as I shared, I'm very intrigued by this idea, and I also recognize all of the structural barriers. Um, I think I'll kick us off by saying the faculty. I let I I think the students will come along, and I think the industry, our employers will come along pretty quickly. I think our faculty have to have buy-in for changing to these structures. And that's hard when we have embedded the tradition to emulate the excellence that we received when we were students, right? I think we're trying to give students the wonderful experiences that we received in the classroom so often. And so I think the faculty, the culture of the faculty, that culture of teaching and learning has to change first.
Yeah, and and for me, I'd like to say that I think there are 3 points that I'd like to bring up. One, and it may be what we've heard already, culture has to shift. You know, we talk about being mission driven and flexible and all the rest of it, but in many ways, we're risk averse. So I think we must start looking at normalizing experimentation as core to our mission, not just peripheral to it, and redefine failure, even as an institution, as learning rather than a liability. I think the second area is that policy has to catch up. We've referenced this idea that we're entrenched. We have a lot of entrenched barriers that sit outside of our institutions. We mentioned financial aid tied to credit hours, accreditation, licensure, et cetera, seat time versus competency based and all the rest. We need to really take a look at how are we modernizing many of those policies, and we have to really get involved with advocates to make that happen. I think the third area is this idea of leadership courage. You know, we talk a lot about leadership and courage, and we know there's a lot of issues now because for a president, for senior leaders, it puts their reputation, it puts comfort, it puts political capital on the line, especially where we are now with AI, because it is going to transform what we do, how we work, how we teach, how we advise, etc. And so for us as CEOs, I think it's important for us to be very honest with our boards about the trade-offs. I think, as Rachel made mention, with our faculty, you know, about the changing roles of our faculty and also our legislators. You know, how do we convince them that there are a lot of outdated metrics that need to change? I think that is so very, very important. I think as I conclude with this idea, this third point about leadership courage, I really think that we have to create those conditions where all of our colleagues in our institutions, including our students, are seen as co-designers. I'm not sure really what that means, but we sure don't want them to be passive recipients from the president or senior leadership to the constituents that we have within our institution. So I really think that we're going to have to look at systemic change from a risk perspective. And I think we're going to have to look at incentives and the infrastructure from a leadership perspective as well. Faculty workload, advising models, technology systems, et cetera. There's an awful lot to do, but I think the question that we always have to ask here is, are we protecting the systems we inherited, or are we really striving to serve the students and employers as they're coming to us today?
Well, and speaking of the systems we've inherited, we've all, certainly I have spent our careers learning how to operate effectively and at the maximum level within those structures and constraints that we all have grown accustomed to. So relearning everything, it would be involved, especially, I go back to the example of the competency-based education and changing that, getting rid of the Carnegie unit. Which to me, again, was one of the biggest systemic changes rather, that we discussed that day. And I mean, I really don't have a lot to add other than, culture would be everything, and accepting failure, as we would tackle something like that. And Ski, I loved what you said. I can't remember what it was, but you said something like, I wish I had it. I hope you have it written down. It was something about learning, and it's learning is more important, and growing is more important than getting it perfect. I think something to that effect. But everything that everyone has already said, absolutely. It would take courage. It would take a complete focus on the student experience. It would take a complete shift of everything that we do. It would take faculty buy-in, of course. Big changes always do.
And Rebecca, following up on that, one of the things that I thought about as you were talking is we have to stop being insular of ourselves. Yes, we have 1,100 wonderful community colleges. We have aspirational colleges among that sector. But I was talking to a student the other day who's leaving us and transferring to a college with the initials of Southern New Hampshire University. And what's really interesting is they are doing some novel things and they are using credit for demonstrated competency or prior learning more so than we are. And it's a military vet who's leaving us and is able to get quite a bit of credit for his demonstrated competency of 20 years in the military that we were really unwilling to do. But right or wrong, I'm not here to judge all that, but we need to take a look outside our institutions because something like Southern New Hampshire University, who's really doing a lot of advertising in our area in central Pennsylvania, as well as all that they're doing in marketing, and doing very well. My administrative assistant got her associate's degree at Hack, but then went on for her bachelor's, now getting her master's next month from SNHU, and will leave the institution and work in her profession. So again, and then educational corporate entities. We know years ago, maybe Lee and I are the oldest two on this group, Motorola had a Motorola University. Other institutions, other private companies had universities. Some of those have gone away, but many of the universities now, look at Google, look at some of those, are forming their own institutions, even companies in our own area, maybe yours as well. They're like, we don't have time for your credit, for your accreditation. You know, faculty have to be accredited that they had a master's degree and X amount of credits. We don't have time for all that. Lee Lambert was a nuclear scientist for 21 years. He can come in and easily teach. I think, and the last thing I'll say is, I always think about Bill Gates. He could never come to any of our colleges and teach a class in computer science or whatever because he never got the degree. But yeah, he did a few things that I think, maybe changed the world, but he still couldn't teach because he doesn't have the credit. He doesn't have the degree. He doesn't, what outmoded, lines of thinking and process is all of that in today's so rapid change and all the rest of that. That's the stuff we have to start divorcing ourselves from and looking at other models.
Well, I'm going to turn to you, Lee, first. I know you're going to speak, but because of you're going to speak, I wanted to ask you this, see if your thought is on that same line, which is I've asked you to think very creatively and bold. So can you allow yourself, okay, forget the boards and unions and everybody else. If you were the emperor, okay, if you're the dictator, you had total authority, what would be one radical experiment you will do?
Right.
Because I know all of you are innovative.
Let me put it in the context, building off of what happened in the last segment and closing off with ski. I think we go back to Jim Collins's book, Good to Great. And there was Admiral Stockdale had a really nice story in there. And one of the aspects of the Stockdale paradox was you have to accept the reality of your situation. We have over 40 million Americans who have some college, no credential. If that is not an indictment on our system, what is? And and that number is growing each and every year. So we have to come to terms with the new reality. So as we think about this new reality, I think borrowing from what's happening in industry, my family is rooted in the military. I spent time in the military. I think the Army has a model for us to think about, not their command and control part of that. It's about how they develop their people. I think that's a model we need to explore more fully. So with that said, I would launch a district-wide mastery-based ecosystem in which progression is based on demonstrated capability supported by a human-guided AI partner. So this is not a technology pilot, but a systems experiment, one that redesigns how learning, assessment, advising, and workforce alignment functions when the calendar is no longer the organizing principle. Students would advance based on what they can demonstrate in real or simulated contexts, supported by continuous feedback, adaptive pacing, and authentic assessment rather than by credit accumulation alone. In many ways, it would be a contemporary version of on-the-job learning, scaled through AI, governed by the liberal arts, and integrated into our overall academic enterprise designed to prove that equity, rigor, and workforce relevance can coexist when mastery, not time, becomes the coin of the realm. which would launch a district-wide mastery ecosystem.
Drop
Love
the
it.
mic. That was a drop the mic statement, Lee. Wow.
Okay, one radical experiment. Come on. It's
The
just in
session,
here. Don't worry.
session's over now. Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, we just all have to plus one that. The one thing he didn't add is I think the data piece.
Yeah.
We have so much data and we just have not figured out how to use it. So add to Lee's experiment that predictive data and data where we can actually for a t after the student leaves us, after they're gone, continue to see what is the impact that that person has on their community, themselves, and so we continue to tell that story.
Dig Joe, is this kind of the hook to kind of bring us to the end?
We're almost there. I'm looking at the clock now.
So
That's why I want you to get radical and then disappear.
so here's a conversation I had with my board recently. I'll be very quick about this. I said if we were designing Hack today, knowing what we know about our current students' lives, their work schedules, their aspirations, caregiving, all the rest of it. Here's the question. What is the one core structure we would not, NOT, build the way it exists now? And the question there is period, I guess. But then it would say, why are we still defending that? So what is the one core structure we would not build the way it exists now? And how can we use AI to help us answer that question?
Love that. Others chime in.
So I loved what Lee said, and Ski, you're right. Mic drop, and Rachel, you made it even stronger. And then the one piece I'd like to add is, I would in the dream world, we're dreaming. All learning is contextualized, either in a workplace or some kind of setting where they are applying what they are learning in real time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Yes, makes sense, isn't it?
That's a double drop the mic moment, Rebecca. Double drop.
You're very
Okay.
kind, Ski.
I think that Ski, you started that in terms of a question. I think a challenge question that you would ask. Any others? I want to ask the rest of the panel as your final word. Like, what's one question like Ski posed? That you believe you want to ask, or you think others CEOs should be asking their cabinet, their faculty, union, any constituency, that how they be intentionally designed to challenge the status quo.
So I'll add to what Ski raised by just framing it this way. If we were designing our institutions from scratch today, in a world where intelligence is infrastructure and mastery can be demonstrated in real time, what would we stop organizing around time and what would we organize around capability instead?
Good question. Okay, any others? If not, then I was
just gonna, Joe, if I can just, and I know we've talked about this for a long time, but we really are coming to an important point in our life cycle. Yes, community colleges are seen as the darlings, the democracy's college, they're the Ellis Islands. I get all that. So important, so important. But we're not going to be able to live on those reputations much longer. 4-year institutions, 2-year institutions, proprietary schools are all changing. We also know that many schools are closing, technical institutes, 4-year institutions. And I want to believe that that is only going to continue to speed up. One, because we know the enrollment cliff, we know all of that kind of thing. But if we're not, and this has been something throughout our history, I think, if we're not relevant, if we're not current, they are going to go somewhere else. And as I mentioned earlier, Google's taken this on their own others, Meta, others are forming their own institutions. In town here, we've got a couple large manufacturers saying, we love you guys and we'll use you, but you're not quick enough. And so, we can have these conversations, and I hope in 10 years when Rebecca and Rachel are still here, they're not bringing up these same things. Lee and I will be in the nursing home listening to it. Right. So Rachel and Rebecca, we're keeping you on your...
I'll be on a beach.
Okay, all right.
In 10 years, I hope to be on a beach too.
Okay, that's why we have to feed these seedlings, right? So thank you really for joining us today, reflect on some of the think tank ideas. I think that I don't want some of those ideas to die. So I appreciate you sharing in a very bold and visionary way, and even adding new ideas today, that you never know what seeds are planted, and we have to plant those seeds. If you want to be on the beach, let's make sure the next generation is going to carry some of these provocative ideas, but then it has to start somewhere, right? Like you said, Ski. So I want to thank you for your time and your leadership while you're still in the chair. Okay, you can't get away with it. You have to lead this movement in for this new era. We have a quarter of a century has gone. We still have 75 years to end the century. I think it is going to be an exciting era for the community colleges, only if we are willing to adapt and change and perhaps even revolutionize, right? So, Rachel, can you drop that CEO think tank brief paper for our audience today? And I know today's webinar is recorded and it will be distributed, and with that think tank paper alone. Nick, I haven't heard from you. Can you make your closing remarks? We talked a lot about data.
Yeah, I think I'm excited to hear all the talk about data, because I think that while it might not be the most exciting topic, I think it is the foundation of decision making for the future, being able to truly understand what's going on with our students and be able to offer better programs, better mapping, more efficient degrees, to getting students to, what we say at Zogotech, family sustaining wages. Like, that is our number one goal. How are we helping students get to a place where they are able to support their families? Because ultimately this is why they're doing this, right? And so I think that that's really critical. And finally, as my final thought, we want to continue this conversation as well with our schools, and with any of the schools that want to continue that conversation, client or not, because we want to learn and grow with you. Vendors are partners. We are not in a vacuum either, and we want to be able to figure out how to create tools that are going to make you and your students the most efficient.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Ding Joe, and to all of our panelists for their time today.
I want to thank you and Mike and your entire Zogotech team and working with the Community College Think Tank on the Think Tank. And if you missed the last April's Think Tank, we definitely want to invite you to join us again at AACC this year. We have 2 think tanks for CEOs lined up at the annual conference in Washington State in Seattle. So, Rachel, do you have any final words?
No, thank you everybody for joining. That conference is April 10th through 14th in Seattle. You can register now at aaccannual.com.
Thank you all. We'll
Thank
see
you.
you in Seattle.
Go Seahawks.
Thank you.
Go Broncos, if we're going to do that now at the end. So.
Well, thank you so much. You all were just great, and I love your comments, and I really hope that more will see the recording. Rachel,